right, guys, welcome back. It is a Built by Vitality podcast. My name is Steve Pinkerton. As always, I'm sitting with
Philip Lewis.
And today we have Steve Hall with us. Steve Hall is the owner of Fight to Win Jiu Jitsu, who just opened up last Wednesday.
Correct.
Right here at the Vitality Building. And what we're going to do today is talk about his journey. I think when you look at the parallels of the fitness industry and the jiu-jitsu world, I think there are a lot of parallels, the discipline that goes into it, and it's always been intriguing to me. So this is almost as selfish for me to do this as it is to everybody else, but I also think there are a ton of people out there in the Vitality world, in the community, that say, man, if I just could find a place to do jiu-jitsu, I maybe would do that. Well, I'm telling you right now, we've got the spot. All right. Steve, I've worked with him. I don't know. We started working together on this project maybe 4 or 5 months ago. And It was one of the smoothest, easiest transitions, at least from my end. I'm sure it was logistically a little different for Steve, but
it still is.
Just working through that, when you have somebody that you align with and your beliefs and your core values align, it made it so easy. So I'm super excited. I think you guys are really going to enjoy this podcast. We'll dive into his history a little bit. We'll talk about how he got into it. I think at some point we're going to put Philip to sleep and see how that works out.
Great.
Maybe.
Great.
But this will be good. So, Steve Hall, you tell us, talk to us about, I guess let's start from the beginning of this. How did you get involved in jiu-jitsu, and where was that at?
I'm originally from the Eastern Shore, Maryland, Salisbury.
Okay.
My parents are still there. I still get up there fairly often. I guess I was 11 years old. I started Taekwondo with a friend of mine, and I was just doing it because he was doing it. I wasn't super involved. And a few years later, it was kind of a fight getting in and out of the door. My parents kind of just said, you know what, we're not taking you anymore because you don't really want to be there. And I took a couple of years off. And when I decided on my own to go back, I decided that it was something I really wanted to do. And I really enjoyed the competition side of it.
Of Taekwondo?
Taekwondo.
Okay.
Yeah, Taekwondo. It was a mixture of Taekwondo, Ishinryu, and Aikido. Western Masters. I still keep in touch with my original instructor. He's up in Avondale, I believe, Maryland, on the other side of D.C. And still, he's very heavily into the striking, stand-up side. And we don't necessarily, we went different paths. Mm-hmm. So when I came back, he is traditionalist, very, very, very talented, world class in what he does. And he ended up leaving the Eastern Shore, going back to get his doctorate. And the guy that he left us with that took over the school was Golden Gloves boxer in the Army, kind of a knuckle dragger, for lack of a better term, and somebody I really connected with very well. And and back in '94, the UFC came out. And so Royce Gracie was the first one that made waves on this, and my instructor was the one that brought me into it. And we said, hey, this thing's coming up. It's about fighting, something that we all kind of like doing anyway. And he was fighting back in the 80s when it was still very different back then. When you got to the ground, they basically just stood you up. Mm-hmm. And this thing came out, which was the UFC, which was, to me, was just fascinating. And we were watching it, and this little skinny little Mexican guy comes out there, and we're like, this guy's going to get wrecked. And it was Royce Gracie. And he changed the world instantly.
And you were 13, 14 years old this time?
At that point, that would have been 94, so senior in high school.
Okay.
So, I think I was already black belt in Taekwondo at that point. Might have been teaching for about a year.
Okay.
And was heavily competitive in the local area. Just like competition. Mm-hmm. Like competition, everything. My parents pushed me into all kinds of sports, and that was kind of where I landed.
Okay.
And the moment that I saw it, I fell in love with it. I said, that's what I want to do. And it just wasn't really available. It didn't exist. There wasn't a big Brazilian influence in the U.S. And where we were, Philly was the closest guy. This guy, Steve Maxwell, he was a purple belt. under Helson Gracie, who was Royce's oldest brother. And we ended up making that drive. It was about a 3.5 hour drive. We would drive for 3.5 hours, go train for 3 hours, and then drive back. And we were doing that twice a month. And it didn't work. It was a garage team, and we just hurt each other, basically. Mm-hmm. But the passion was already there. And then 98-ish, I ended up, I think I was kind of just bouncing around for a couple of years, living out of a backpack in Ocean City and working in the restaurant industry.
Now, how do you end up in, you get out of high school, how do you end up out in Ocean City as kind of a nomad, out of a backpack?
Didn't know what I wanted to do.
Okay.
And so at that point, my parents were just really supportive of pretty much everything I've always done. And I did look into going into the military. Marines, as a matter of fact, the recruiters ran me off because they were so aggressive.
Yeah.
And they were knocking on the door every 20 minutes. And
especially when you meet somebody like you. When you meet someone like Steve, now as an officer recruiter, but on the enlisted side, when you meet someone like Steve, you can know in about 20 seconds that this dude is exactly who you're looking for.
Yeah.
So I can
I've been
understand.
told I don't lie very well, and I never have. My emotions are out front all the time, and it's to a fault. And it got to the point where these guys really turned me off really quickly, and I said, listen, you guys got to go, and kind of pulled me away. And I had some friends that went into basic and came back, and they were different than where they left. And I said, that's not really my path. So
you're in Ocean City.
Yeah.
You've made the transition from Taekwondo to...
No, at that point, it was still at the Taekwondo school.
Okay.
And we had some mats that we would put down on the floor, and we would just beat each other up, basically. Okay. Probably the most of my training at that point was in the living room, 6 inches from the brick fireplace, and lots of rug burn, and thankfully no major cuts.
Okay.
And my brother and a lot of the neighborhood kids, and that's how we all started, and that's how I think most people started that way, kind of in the garage. Let's just kind of play with this thing and see if it works, and it got cool really quick. But it was really difficult to pull it from so far away and not have somebody that's really hands-on, because this really is a hands-on thing. And so just bumming around, and ended up it's time to go to school. So went down to Sarasota, Florida. Started in Tampa. My sister was in Tampa. She was working at Busch Gardens at the time, so I moved in with her for a little while. And I found a Jiu Jitsu school in Tampa that was it was a Hicks and Gracie school, and immediately when I walked in the door, I said, "This is home." And that's kind of where it started. But I wasn't there very long, and then I actually went to school in Sarasota, which is about an hour south of there, and that's where my current school is still there. That's where my current instructor is.
Oh, really?
And so I'm still technically with them and under them, and I go back and visit them several times.
In Sarasota.
Yeah, I try to get down there at least once a year, but I try to get more if I can.
Okay.
My instructor down there, and it's a very interesting story, because it was the purple belt up in Philly. He's guru. You might know who he is. It's Steve Maxwell, kettlebell guru.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's who I
said that name a second ago, and it rang a bell. I couldn't.
Maxercise. He was in Philly. He was right down the street from where Rocky ran the steps. And,
okay.
So that's where I kind of got my start. And Steve and I still communicate with each other, and pretty interesting, because the community still is very, very small. And I know there's a lot of overlap with kettlebells, with CrossFit, with Jiu Jitsu, because they tend to stand next to each other very well. So when I moved down to Tampa, Kerry King was a judo black belt, and he ended up introducing me to Mike Swain, who is a silver medalist in Judo Olympics. Very, very, very cool guy. And I still have a good relationship. He's the one that's sending me the mats.
Okay.
And so just so many deep layers. And Kerry was affiliated with Royce's other brother, Hickson. And there was another Hickson school in Sarasota, which was literally 2 minutes down the road from where my apartment was that I found. And I could ride my bike there. And Gordon Hester, he was under Hickson. Bill Murphy, these are guys that, Bill was a purple belt, Gordon was a blue belt. And again, this is 98, so at that point, an American purple belt just didn't exist. They were like unicorns.
For those that aren't familiar with jiu-jitsu, will you just quickly walk through the belt system for us? Where it starts?
There's 5 belts.
Okay.
So it's white, blue, purple, brown, black.
White, blue, purple, brown, black.
And typically, under Royce is a minimum 10 years to black belt.
Which we're going to talk about with you very shortly.
Yeah. And so the average now is a little bit shorter than that with the internet and everything that's going on. I think there's some guys that are definitely picking it up much, much quicker than the way that we did it. But 8 to 10 years is average.
Okay.
8 to 12, depending on how often you're going and what you're putting into it. But it's not a short process. First belt, blue belt, takes about a year and a half to get. Purple belt's about 3 to 5 years. So at that point, American purple belts, they didn't exist. They just weren't around, and we had one in our school. So it was, to me, that was like the Mecca. I was so happy just to be in that environment. And very shortly after that, my instructor got diagnosed with leukemia. And so 30 years old, it's not really a good thing. He was a stud, and he's still alive, and he has kids, and I still talk to him pretty much monthly. We still communicate with each other quite a bit. And it just kind of shows you the power of jiu-jitsu and just how powerful everybody is that does this thing. Mm-hmm. And he would actually go get his chemo treatment. He'd come into class, and right in the middle of class, he'd get up and go throw up in the bathroom and then come back out and teach class. and this went on until he couldn't do that anymore. And then we brought in Charles dos Anjos from Brazil, and true Brazilian black belt. And he'd been a black belt for about a year, and he ended up taking over our program, and he's the one that really started me on my path of really going deep into jiu-jitsu.
What was it like to see that first Brazilian black belt in person and be able to train with him as someone that hadn't ever?
It was life-changing. I think at that point I'd spent about 3 years with Bill as a purple belt, and 3 months with Charles changed all of it.
Because the gap between a purple, brown, and black, I mean, it's just massive.
It's not even close. I mean, again, we're talking about several years between each one, but yeah, there's a reason why the divisions are there. They're not even close to the same level. Even on the first side of the belt, when you first get the belt to when the belt starts to really fill in, it's a big change. And that's the cool thing about jiu-jitsu is its perspectives change. You change the way you see the world. And so that's the thing I think that really kind of drew me in more than anything else.
I think that's the correlation. Go ahead.
Is it time in between belts, or is it like time plus like, hey, I want to go to the next belt, and you're like, okay, well, you got to fight me? Like, what's the?
I mean, you're looking at like feudal Japan. Like, unfortunately, at this point, there's no standardized. So basically, anybody can put a black belt on you, and there's nobody really that can say any differently as long as the guy that did it is legit. Yeah. The way that we do it, though, typically the blue belt is kind of just application. How are you doing? Do you understand the terminology? How do you act on the mat? Are you keeping up with the people that are at that level? It's not, like I said, that one is about a year and a half average, and it really show up twice a week, show up 3 times a week, and you're good to go. The next one, the purple belt's a big one. The purple belt we actually test for. It's the first one that I test for, and the test is pretty tough. It's about an hour and a half to 2 hour long test. It's grueling mentally, physically, and the guys take a year to prepare for it. And so at that point, the test is designed. It's just proficiency. It's fundamentals, and everything that I do is based around solid fundamentals. The foundation is everything. The rest of the stuff is personal. And so if you build a good foundation, you can develop your own personal style, and it should be much easier beyond that point. Purple belt, I think, is more of a collection belt. You should be kind of exploring the rest of the world. I equate a lot of it to school. So white belt is like kindergarten, preschool. Like, you don't really get to decide what you eat for dinner. Like, you show up and you kind of you just do what you're supposed to do, and you have fun doing it. And it's really there's no responsibility, and it's a lot of fun. And that's the most important thing that I think that we've developed really well is the white belt. Like, you should be able to walk in and not have any expectations. You should be able to not be nervous coming in the door, and it should be a lot of fun to walk on the mat. And that lasts a while, and then you get into that blue belt, and that blue belt's more like high school. Like, you already know everything, but you don't realize the rest of the world is out there. And so you don't realize how much you don't know yet. And so it's a tough belt because perspectives are really tough at that level.
I think the correlation is so cool to hear Steve talk about jiu-jitsu, and you start in the garage and you start, this is exactly the draw for CrossFitters as well, where you find this new methodology that has piques the same types of interest in people. The people that are looking for like something disciplined, something organized, something detailed, that they've never seen before, and then they're exposed to it, and it's like a water hose. I mean, all these things that you love are getting thrown at you like, oh my gosh. And your adaptation happens so fast in the beginning. Like when you take someone, a CrossFitter that just starts, mentally they're not very tough. They want, it's just
keep them as fundamentals. You keep it as basic as possible. So, how do you get good at jiu-jitsu? Well, you show up and you learn how to tie your belt, and that's it. Yeah. And so that's the first step. You have to walk in the door, and that's it. And whatever demons people carry in with them, like they have to get rid of them. The big thing now is that we have to just focus on just tying the belt. Like that's the only thing that matters. And so it takes a lot of that other stuff away. And then when you get in further into that purple belt's more like college. Like, a lot of people really screw that up the first couple of years. And so it takes a little while to kind of figure out what you're doing with that. Some people do it well, most people don't. And then by the time you get into that brown belt, it's more graduate school, and then the black belt would be more real life. Like it's really focused at that point. So that correlation to me, it just really makes a whole lot of sense, and you can see it from stage to stage with most people, but like it really does take a lifetime to get that figured out. This is a 10-year process. How different were you 10 years ago? And not in the same place, not even the same person. And so that process of getting there, it takes a lot of dedication, and it's a family, it's a community, and that was one of the things that I was really drawn towards is that jiu-jitsu as a whole. Like I literally have friends all over the world. Like there's not really a place that you can't go in the jiu-jitsu community and say my name where somebody doesn't know me, and to me that's neat, and that's way better than being able to choke somebody. That's okay too. but the community is what's cool.
So you have this new black belt come over. You start training under him. What happens then? What's the progression for Steve Hall?
Okay, so Charles came in. Charles kind of shook some things up. At that point, I'd already fought. So I actually fought MMA, and it was NHB, and so there's no holds barred. MMA is mixed martial arts. That's what you have now. More like what Royce was doing in the early 90s. So this is the early Florida back in the 90s, and there were no real rules. I mean, you could still pull hair. I think the rules were no eye gouging, no fish hooking, and no groin strikes, and that was basically it. And then anything else was kind of picked and choose. And at that point, I had 3 months of jiu-jitsu, my first MMA fight, 10 years of Taekwondo, and so I thought I was pretty good. And I jumped in we had a ring. There were no cages in Florida at that point. There were very few of them. And I get in the ring with this guy that had already had a couple of fights. And I figured out that I could point spar him. Like I really just bloodied his lip, and I didn't know how to knock him out. And that's what sport did. And so I went, okay, this isn't really working. And he took a shot in on me, and I choked him. And it was like that. And I went, okay, I'm not doing Taekwondo anymore. Now I'm doing jiu-jitsu forever. And it was a hard right turn, and that's kind of what started all of it. And I ended up having several more fights. I ended up fighting pro. And all of this was before I got to purple belt and before Charles came along. And so I actually still hold the record for one of the longest fights in Florida. It was 47 minutes with no breaks, and I had 3 fights that night, which is illegal now.
I can't do that in a workout down there.
Yeah,
47 minutes.
And there were 2 more fights that night, which is illegal in the U.S. now. So I mean, it'll never be broken. And so there's just all these cool stories that just kind of happened because I was around the right people at the right time. And then Charles comes along, and Charles is we were under Gracie Baja, which was centralized out of Florida. And Charles goes, okay, Baja's starting to change what they're doing, and we don't really want to be under Baja anymore. Charles wanted to make his own name. And so he goes, hey, I'm going to go to the seminar up in Ocala, which is about 2 hours north of us. And Royce Gracie was there. And at that point, I'd never met Royce. And so I'd already been training for maybe 3-4 years consistently, maybe closer to 5, and in Sarasota. And we go up and we meet Royce, and he was awesome. And we just we liked him right away and said, hey, can you come do a seminar at our school? And so a couple months later, he says, yeah, and he shows up, and I ended up sparring with him that night. And I think that we had a room that was probably twice the size of this room. It was very small, and we had probably 80 people packed in there, and everybody's standing around me. There's pictures of it where Royce and I are just sitting in front of each other, and he gave me my brown belt that night, and
Wow.
I've been under him ever since. And so that was 2003, and Charles has been right by my side the whole time, going through all of that. Royce, in 2003, I got my brown belt, and in 2006, Royce gave me my black belt, and that was I'm the 9th black belt in the world from Royce ever.
Wow. I
And
didn't know
right
that.
now, his highest ranked student. There's 5 of us in the world that are the rank that I am under Royce.
So when you met him, obviously he wasn't planning on giving you a brown belt until he
Yeah,
you
we
sparred with him.
sparred. Yeah,
and
we
then,
rolled.
and then you realize, like, holy cow, there's something special about this guy.
Yeah.
He has the skill set that a brown belt would possess. He gives you the brown belt, and
Right.
then boom, now you've got this relationship with him.
Yeah.
And you've been training under him ever since. And so you're saying that there's 6 black belts under.
There's probably 5 right now that hold the rank that I have, but I was number 9 that he gave out ever, because he just he was a fighter, and so
Yeah.
he didn't have his own school. He would teach seminars. That's what he does now. He travels the world and teaches seminars. He'll be here. He'll come in here once a year, and he'll come visit, and everybody's welcome to come get a picture with him and meet him. Really, really cool guy.
When did you make the switch from? How long did you fight?
I fought for about 5 years, and I think, most people when they start, depending on where they are, the fighting range is kind of like NFL. Like, you get 6 to 7 years tops, and that's it. So it doesn't matter what age you are when you start. You get the clock is ticking from start to finish, and it was never something that I wanted to do for a career. It was something that I did because I loved it, and it was fun, and I really enjoyed doing it. And then, go figure, as soon as I got married, things changed.
Yeah, that was my next question. Yeah,
and it all of a sudden it turned in my head, and I was smart enough to recognize it, because it was before I couldn't believe I could get paid to beat somebody up. And then as soon as it was not just me anymore, it was, this guy's going to try to beat me up, and I don't think I like that idea anymore.
Yeah.
And so I was, like I said, I was smart enough at that moment to say that was it, and that was the last time that I fought.
I would imagine your peer group, you could probably say that few people made that decision as well as you did. I can see it in the CrossFit world all the time, where to make the transition from competing in CrossFit or competing or fighting, I guess competing in Jiu Jitsu is a little bit different than fighting in what you were doing. But I think being able to recognize that pivot, a lot of people would ignore that and try and go a little bit longer, a little bit further.
Everybody has.
And I think to see that you made that switch, that's probably the reason why you're sitting where you are now with what you have. So
So I knew when I was a blue belt that I loved teaching. And I liked competing, and competing was something that I did for a passion. And there was a lot of reasons for it. And some of it were vices. Some of it was, I like beer and chicken wings like everybody else does. And I knew if I had a competition coming up that I wouldn't cheat. And so that was part of it, because, I was in my early 20s. I worked in a restaurant, and we partied hard. And it was always an excuse that everybody would go out for the weekend, and I'd go drink water because I wanted to train the next morning, or I had a fight coming up, and nobody gave me a hard time about it. And the restaurant industry is very brutal to be a part of. And so it was something that I kind of mitigated a lot of that. And I still had my bad days too. Again, being 20, I got away with a lot of it. But as I got older, it wasn't hard to get away from it, because that gold always tasted better than that beer. It was always way more important to me to go in Saturday morning. And there were times that, I probably had too much to drink and still made it in, and the guys knew it. And I don't recommend that, and now, there's no reason to be that way. And I wish that I hadn't done a lot of that when I was younger, because you only get one body, and I've damaged mine a lot over the years by going too hard all the time. And so I think that's the most important thing right now. But like I said, there's a lot of layers to this. I reffed for 16 years for the North American Grappling Association. I travel the whole world reffing, and I loved competition, and I competed all over the world, and that was the advantage of being able to travel and referee and train all over the world and make all these great friends. And we got to cross lines that normally wouldn't have been able to cross, and so we got to go into different schools and different gyms with people that normally we wouldn't really associate with. And so I went from being okay at competition to really figuring it out through attrition, where it was just I did it until I got really good at it. And it got to the point where it was just winning became a habit. I was expecting to win, and it wasn't something that it was nerves. It wasn't anything like that. Like, it was, I'm going in there and I'm going to win because that's what I do. And so, and I did that for a long time, and then had kids. And that changed things too.
Is there if you had to pick one cool story about traveling to a different school and a different culture and a different whatever, is there something that stands out that is a pretty cool story?
There's a lot of them.
Where was your favorite place to travel?
Hawaii.
Really?
Hawaii, yeah. Brazil was fun. Everywhere. I mean, I've gotten to go all over the world, so it's been very, very neat, and seeing different cultures and different ways of dealing with things. The interesting thing of Hawaii is they have a very Japanese influence over there, and there's not really high school wrestling over there. So it's all judo, it's all gi based. And so you don't have the wrestling influence like you do in the States. And so it was a lot purer. It was cleaner. And so it was really neat to just watch the difference on how they treated each other and how they acted on the mat. And I think that was probably the coolest place that I got to ref, other than probably even Brazil, where that's the Mecca. We went to Rio. We did a tournament in Brasilia. I got to spend a couple of days in Rio training with some people that treated me like family the minute I walked in the door, because we either already knew each other or we had mutual friends. Mm-hmm. And so I got treated very, very well while we were there, and took one of my black belts with me, and he got treated the same way. So I mean, that's the neat side of this community. It's very tight, it's very small, and we don't burn bridges, because that kind of stuff is super important. You know, we didn't pay for much while we were down there. We got treated like family, and these are people on the other side of the world that some of them I'd never met before, and we still got treated that way, because that's how it goes.
I love
and
that.
So, like I said, I've been very lucky to surround myself with really, really cool people. But the competition in Brazil was cool. It was neat. There was, in every single division, there was one guy that was way better than everybody else, and everybody knew who that guy was. Yeah. And that was interesting, because you don't really see that in the States very much. And every division had that in the black belt division. And I think where we were, there was I think 80 or so black belts that competed that day, which is way too many, you know. Wow. It's insane. Like, normally we get 2 or 3 of them that show up to a tournament to compete, and there was like 80 of them, and they were all good, but there was one that stood out from everybody else in every division. So that was interesting to see. Mm-hmm. And seeing how going over to UK and going over to Europe, and seeing the difference in their training methodologies and the stages on it, because Brazil's kind of where it started. It's transitioned up into California and into Florida and spread through the U.S., and it was a little bit behind going over into Europe. And so they were a little bit behind where we are, just time-wise, but they're catching up. I'd say they're pretty caught up now. But when we first started going over there, I was expecting to see a lot of judo influence, and it wasn't quite the way that I expected it to be. So just really interesting. I'm just a student of jiu-jitsu, and I always really enjoyed seeing the difference, even from in the U.S., geographically, how things are different based off of leadership. So each school, each gym has a different leader. They have their methodologies, and just like CrossFit, like there's different CrossFit gyms all around us. They're not here, you know, because they're run by different leaders. And so you can't clone this. And so it's the same thing all across the U.S. You have great instructors, but they're not the same. And that's one of the things that I've been able to do very well is take bits and pieces from all over the world and bring them back and be able to share that and change my views and be able to grow. And so I've always been very good about staying a student. And I think that's really what's gotten me to the point where I've been able to compete, I've been able to ref, I've been able to teach and do all of that and still be fairly proficient with all of it. And so, and not many people get to do that. You're either a competitor or you're an instructor. Like most people don't get to cross those lines.
Flower ear.
Yeah.
That means nobody's hitting him in the head.
That's an interesting thing.
He takes you out so quick, you don't touch him.
It's an interesting thing that you say that.
Cauliflower ear.
Well,
I told him I Googled how to get it, and you don't even have it after all this training. I'm like, man, that's pretty cool.
I asked Royce the same thing about 10 years ago. I said, how come your ears aren't all busted up?
Yeah.
And he just looks at me and goes, good technique.
See, I knew it.
So we got to reframe everything we've talked about because we've said, man, there's a couple people you don't. I was telling Philip, I said, hey, there's some things I've learned throughout my life. You know, you don't mess with wrestlers and you don't mess with people that have cauliflower ears. You just don't. Those are just things, you just let those things pass. Well, now we got to add on to it, you know.
You never know.
You never know.
You never know.
You're in Sarasota.
Right.
What year did you open up your first school?
Well, I was a purple belt when I first started teaching. I was teaching at New College, which is a private school down in Sarasota. My instructor, Charles, started the program, and he didn't want to run it, so he gave it to me. And he said, you know, I got this thing going on. Do you want to take over it? And I said, yeah. And I was employee of the state, which was pretty cool. And that program actually ended up, after I moved up to North Carolina, was the first accredited Jiu Jitsu program in the U.S. For college, which was really kind of pretty special. And we were just kind of a club team. And we'd always start out with a bunch of kids in the beginning, and it got whittled down. And there's still a handful of kids that every now and again, one of them will pop in and come visit me and see how I'm doing 10 years later, 15 years later. And that's kind of how I got started, really kind of doing my own thing. And I always knew that that's what I wanted to do. And like I said, I did a lot of things. I worked in a restaurant. I worked on high-end fishing boats for a while. I managed a mosquito misting company, worked in warehouses, worked for UPS. I've done a lot of really interesting jobs and worked for and with a lot of really interesting people. And I was managing Mosquito Nix company down in Florida. And my buddy John Ellison gave me a call one day. He was one of my training partners down there. And he said, hey, I'm up in Charlotte. Do you want to come up here? And I said, no. And he said, wait a minute, just hear me out. He said, I came up here. He moved up here to be closer to his mom, who lives over in Huntersville. And he said he's working at Peak Fitness at the time. He was managing several of the Peak Fitnesses. And said, this is right in the middle of The Ultimate Fighter had just come out. And so we want to put this program in all the Peak Fitnesses. And at that point, there was like 40 of them, and they were everywhere. And so I'm like, I guess I'll come up and check it out. And I talked to Jen about it, and she said, we got to go look, because if we don't, like, I'll never forget myself. Mm-hmm. And so said we came up, we spent a weekend up here. I ended up meeting the owners of Peak Fitness, and we ended up liking each other right away. And we worked out a great deal for me to come up here. They ended up paying for the upfit and taking care of everything for me to get into the Peak Fitness over in Concord, over by the Walmart. Mm-hmm. And we were, it used to be a Gold's Gym. I guess before that it was a movie theater. And so we were up on the second floor when we started. And at that point, I had no idea what I was doing. I was a black belt for a year and never run my own business before, had managed and worked for a couple of other people, was very used to working 70, 80 hours a week and being told what to do. And came up here with nothing, just dropped it all. Jen was still working. She had 3 years. She was a kindergarten teacher. She had 3 months left. And so I came up here and was in an extended stay hotel by myself for 3 months and started this business by myself. And then had to figure out what to do with my time, and I think that was the hardest thing, because I went from, like I said, working to nothing. Yeah. And so I was doing just busy work, just cleaning toilets and things like that, just to stay moving. Yeah. And I think that was probably the hardest part, because the whole thing of me coming up here was, I'm just coming up to teach jiu-jitsu and start this program and see what happens, and I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And it was all trial and error and all done the hard way. And so Jen comes up. We find a house. We ended up over in Highland Creek and had our first child. all in the same year. And so it was a terrible idea. and I was still competing heavily at that point. Was competing probably once a month.
Wow.
And pushing hard and training hard. And we did a lot of things the hard way. Peak Fitness ended up filing Chapter 11, changed the name to ZX Fitness. Ended up shifting some hands for some pretty bad reasons. And the guy that ended up taking over kicked me out instantly and said, "We don't want you in here, get out." And I said, "Well, what does that mean?" He said, "Well, today's Sunday, I want you out by Friday." And I said, "Okay." And so we ended up finding the little warehouse. And actually, I looked at the gymnastics studio where the kid that does Burn. He was moving. He was just on his way up, and he was moving out of that space. And I looked at that space, and it wasn't a good fit.
Yeah.
And so we ended up in the little warehouse. And because I like to, at that point, I'd done zero advertising. Everything was word of mouth, and it was good enough, and we were doing very well with it. And so we were kind of hiding.
Yeah.
And we're back tucked in this little warehouse over here. We trained on a Thursday night, had the mats ripped out that night, and we're up and training the next morning in the next place. And so it was a 24-hour turnover. And we were there for 10 years. And so it was doing fine. And early on, like I said, I had no intentions of really doing any of this. It was just kind of, let's go for a ride and see what happens. Yeah. And there were 2 other black belts that were in the area when I moved here, and I had a different name than they did. And so in that time, there were a lot of people that were kind of drawn towards me. And I started with 12 students, and I've never gone backwards. And it's just been building and building. And we've built schools. And so right now we have 9 locations. And so they're affiliates of mine. I run 2 of them. The main location, which was the headquarters, was the one that ended up over in the warehouse over there. And we have a Concord location, which is right down the street from here too, over at Norse. I don't really know. I can't really tell you how it happened. You know, it was just kind of, I know how to surround myself with people that I like. And I think that was it.
Yeah.
And so I know the value of the people that I've surrounded myself with. And that's been something that I've always been very good at. And so the team is just absolutely amazing all the way around. And we have a school in Denver. John Plyler runs that one. And I took him under my wing and pulled him under Royce, and he tested for his black belt several years ago, and he got his black belt under Royce also. And John has just pushed me up. And so John's done very, very well, not only in jiu-jitsu, but also in his business, and is doing very well over in Denver. And so it's one of those things that he and I are very, very competitive with each other.
Yeah.
And it always kind of was a stick in the side that he was doing better than I was.
Yeah. I think that's the best part about it is you find people that you surround yourself with there are 2 things are going to happen. You're going to get pulled down to someone else's level, or you're going to get pulled up to somebody. And I've always wanted to put myself around people that were going to pull me along. And
I've done the same thing.
Yeah.
And so what happened, what was interesting about this was, again, that I know the CrossFit world and Jiu-Jitsu world were very close. Mm-hmm. I've had some friends that were in CrossFit all around here. I know most of I know all of the stores around here, every one of them. And I knew yours. And I knew you when you were over in the aviation building. And I actually looked at that space when you moved out. And at that point, it was a little big for what I wanted to do. Part of it was because I was focusing on the outside. I wasn't focusing on the inside a lot. We have a smaller group that was very, very competitive and very tough. And I was spending a lot of time traveling with these other schools, just making sure they were doing well. And so, when you approached me, that was kind of like, okay, John's doing phenomenally well. I'm still over here in this warehouse, like, it's time. And I knew when you built this building, because one of my black belts down in Jacksonville had done the exact same thing, almost the exact same minute, where he had built a strip mall, because it's Florida.
Yep.
and same exact situation where he built his gym and had the tenants in there that are taking care of what he's doing. And the timeline was very, very interesting. So kept a close eye on you the whole time also. And when I think I was over at Derek Pegram's house.
Yep.
And, we were visiting. Luke had just had surgery, and so we were visiting him. And Derek said, hey, Steve's got this space that just opened up. How about you go look at it? And I'm like, I don't really want to. Like, it's not broken, and I don't really want to fix it. And so I was happy in my dungeon.
Yeah.
And, we ended up connecting and talking about it, and same response. Like, it's not broke. I don't really want to be over here.
Yeah.
And I tell you, man, I since we've gotten in here, I'm so thankful because I think you're right. It's the same thing. Like, we're just very like-minded on let's go.
It was when we were talking and you had told me, it made so much sense. You're like, man, I've gotten so used to the way things are because I've spent the last decade putting things in place so that I can operate it the way that fits my schedule with my kids and my family and all that type of stuff.
Yep.
And it made total sense. And when you rock the boat like that, someone cerebral enough like you is going to realize that it's not a plug and play. Like, there's going to now be an adjustment. We understand what that's going to be like for those first 3, 4, 5 months to kind of get this thing back going again. But the hope was, and I firmly believe this, that, man, the community of people that we have at Vitality, it is going to align very well with. And I don't think there's a ton of people that are going to find themselves doing everything, both. I am certainly, and Philip will certainly
I'd rather do that.
Students, 100%. But I just think the people that are going to come to this building, they're going to find themselves either gravitating towards the fitness side or gravitating towards the jiu-jitsu side. And, the one question I get a lot, and I'm curious, is when you look at a no-gi versus gi school, can you explain that to people? So you are... Is that what it's called, a gi school?
Yeah, I don't think it's that so much. We're more of we're Gracie Jiu Jitsu school, and so the Gracie Jiu Jitsu philosophy is more built around self-defense. The majority of what you have, even in our area, is more sport developed. And so you have schools that are driven specifically that the moment you walk in the door, you're pushed towards competition. That's a young man's game, and there's not a lot of females. There's not a lot of people that aren't in good shape, and it's a very niche group. And so we bust outside of those lines. And so we bring in people that are not as confident. We bring in people that are not as in great a shape, and when we help them fix it. I think the biggest thing that I embrace on all of this is that, going back to starting the business, is that I really embrace being uncomfortable, and jiu-jitsu will make you very uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And it's something that I preach, that you have to push change, and being comfortable is something that will, complacency will kill you. Yeah. And so, like, it's so important to go outside of your comfort zone and be okay with that idea, and just enjoy the process. And the last couple of months have been very uncomfortable, but they'll get better.
In your personal opinion, just looking at me and Steve, who do you think would be better at jiu-jitsu, just looking at our statures?
Listen to me. I will.
I'm getting.
Okay.
It's personal. It ultimately comes down to who puts the work in. That's it.
I am.
So he's saying
I am way more willing to be uncomfortable than you are. I can promise you.
He literally just said me, but since he's a tenant here, he was like, "Nah."
What was really interesting to me was my whole life. Well, I say my whole life. It was probably 16 years ago. I had joined the Marine Corps, and there was the quarterback for the Naval Academy at the time was under some litigation. He had some problems, so they had hid him at the basic school, and his name was Brian Stan. Super nice guy. He fought in the UFC for a while. Now he's a commentator. Super nice guy. And they ended up dropping all the issues with him out of the Naval Academy. It was kind of he got a pretty raw deal, and to put him, he had accepted his Marine Corps commission out of the Naval Academy. So we go to the basic school. I finished officer candidate school, go to the basic school, and they say, okay, well, hey, your Marine Corps martial arts program instructor is Brian Stan,
right?
Who was a first lieutenant at the time, and he'd just been sitting there doing nothing for the previous 9 months other than doing martial arts for 10 hours a day. Mm-hmm. And he became very good. Now, I'm not smart enough to compare the belt system. I'm certain that it's not comparable to the Jiu Jitsu belt system, but we had the same belt system in the Marine Corps martial arts program. And I remember
combatives overall. Yeah, yep. Right.
And I remember we got in like a big circle, and one at a time we'd go in and we'd wrestle around with some of these instructors and Brian Stan. And I'm telling you what, I prided myself. I was like I thought I was a tough guy. And I mean, no matter what I did, I'd find myself in just a pretzel situation that I couldn't get out of. And I told myself, I will learn jiu-jitsu at some point, because it was so fascinating to me to be able to utilize it. It had nothing to do with strength or
right.
any of those things. It was intangibles. That was just how much time were you willing to put in, how much exposure could you get to it, and that's how I figured it would work. And I'm so happy it's taken me. I'm 40 years old now, and now I was telling my mom the other night, I'm like, Mom, I'm finally going to do jiu-jitsu. She said, "Oh, you're too old for that. You're going to get hurt." I said, "Mom."
Well, that's the
I'm
difference.
total opposite.
That's the difference.
I took Krav Maga and
very, very different thought process.
Like kick Muay Thai. Mm-hmm. And the place I went, you know Ryan Hoover?
Yep.
I went to his place, the one he used to have in Gastonia when I lived that way.
Right. Fit to fight.
And they had Jeff Jim Moe and all them guys there. So I would take Krav Maga Muay Thai, and they asked me twice. I don't even remember the guys' names. They're like, "Hey, would you jump into jiu-jitsu class or whatever?" And I was like, "No, I'm good. I whatever." They talked me into it twice, and both times in the first few minutes I was in some kind of thing, crazy eight, something.
Yeah, that's how it works.
I just wouldn't go back. I was like, man, I'd rather stand up. If you take me to the ground, I'll just tap out. We'll try again. Like, but I still really want to know it. But back then I would be like, man, screw this. I'm going to go back in and kick the pads, or like, I don't know.
Yeah, I think a lot of that, and that's part of the fear, is that when you walk in the door, are you going to get just tied up? And that's one of the things that we don't do. You know, that's most of the places that you walk into, you'll get that kind of sink or swim mentality that they're training and they don't want you to slow them down any. And so you don't know if you're going to get beat up if you walk in the door. And so we have a curriculum. We have a fundamentals program, and everybody walks in, and it's an hour long, and it's designed for somebody that's never done anything to be able to walk in and get through it. And it's based off of self-defense. It's not based off of fighting. It's not based off of sport. It's based off of being able to even be able to walk away from a fight, you know. And I think that that's the neatest thing about jiu-jitsu, is that the way that I feel about it is that if we bump into each other at any point and you want to fight me, I already know how it's going to end, and it's not worth going through that process. And so that's the way that I feel about it. Like, I know you're going to end up in a hospital, I'm going to end up in jail, and I don't want to miss whatever my kids are doing. And so that power that jiu-jitsu gives you is so cool. And it's just, there's no reason to even go through the motions.
God, I hope you partner with him.
It's not worth it. And so, and that's what I try to give to everybody, you know, that you should be able to walk away from it. You should be able to not put yourself in a situation where you're going to create the problem, you know, and being young and in our 20s, that was hard to do sometimes. And so it's, you know, I prefer to be the quiet guy sitting in the back than the loud guy in the front making a bunch of noise.
Yeah. And I wonder if that's why, you know, it just happened to be this this point in my life, because I'm so much calmer and more.
There's a lot of truth to that.
You know, I think in my late 20s, I get out of the Marine Corps, I'm probably going to end up hurting myself, just because, you know,
and there's a lot of ego involved.
Yeah,
you know, that you're a badass. I mean, there's no question what that means, and that creates conflict.
I love the fact that there is no. I don't know Steve more than 5 or 6 months of working with him, but I can guarantee you. We just did a podcast last week on humility. I bet you there's not one ego inside the four walls of Fight to Win, and it starts
not
with
allowed.
you.
Yeah, it's not allowed.
That's a culture that I've spent my life trying to surround myself with people that believe that, and I think that is where you can learn. That's where you have the best environment to breed that knowledge.
And I think that's where we really parallel each other very well, because when I brag about my team, which I do, I brag about how cool everybody is. It's just everybody's super nice and everybody is neat and they're just great people all around. And the technical side of that is put second, and we're technically second to none. And so that's not even what's important. That's the cool thing that I think is so special about our group. And I think that does work very well with this environment, with being part of Vitality and being part of even this building as a whole, that I think everybody kind of feels the same way. And so it's been easy. It's been great. It wasn't always like that, because like I said, when I was competing regularly, I pulled the same thing. We had a bunch of guys that would hurt you. We had guys that would hurt you if you walked in the door and you didn't look a certain way. And so we would run off people because they didn't fit in. And that was the business model didn't work.
Yeah.
And it didn't work for me either, because I was getting injured all the time. And my guys were getting injured all the time. And so Royce helped us make that change. And I think age and having kids, same thing. It settled me down too. And I fell in love with the idea of just surrounding myself with people that I want to be old with.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest difference. If I don't want to be with you 10 years from now, I'm not going to give you 5 minutes right now.
Yeah. I completely agree.
And that's how I feel about it.
Yeah.
And so it's been easy.
And learning to say no. We've talked about that in the past on this podcast, about how hard it is for people to guard your most valuable resource, which is your time. And sometimes saying no to things that aren't going to, amount to anything that you want to be a part of. Yeah, that's hard for people to do. They find themselves doing things every day that they just don't want to do.
Right.
And it took me a long time to figure that out, where if I don't want to do it, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
I've worked way too hard to get to this point to where I'm going to go sit through something where I don't want to. I won't go do jiu-jitsu if I don't like it, but I know I'm going to love it. So I get excited about that again, because it's something.
But it's environmental too.
Yeah.
Like I said, if you'd have walked into the wrong place first,
Yes.
you might never get to me. I mean, that's the hard part.
And I would have never sought out that. I would have said, no, you know what? I don't want to touch the jiu-jitsu thing because I had a bad experience. And that,
Exactly.
like you said,
And CrossFit has a lot of that
CrossFit
too.
has a ton of places where
They'll hurt you.
people come in and they want to prove that their methodology is the toughest and the hardest. So they want to put people, make people throw up outside, and they don't realize that has just changed that person's trajectory for what their fitness
Forever.
is going to
I'm
be
not doing
forever.
that stuff.
I'll never do it
tried that
again.
one time. I'm
Anywhere.
not doing it.
Anywhere, because they're all lumped into the same category now, and that's too bad.
So with yours, if you're somebody that's never set foot into a jiu-jitsu studio before, a jiu-jitsu school before, is the first step to call or email? Is that the easiest way to
Come
do
by,
this?
spar with him. See
Phil
what you're
said
made of.
Phil wanted to come in and he said he could probably just roll around a little bit with you. But what would
So for those of that have tried so far, this has been a perfect storm of just everything that could go wrong has. So I ported the phone number over from Charlotte to Concord. It was supposed to be done 2 weeks ago. It'll be ported over next Tuesday.
Of course.
So I'm dead in the water. I have no phone number. It was the guy that set it up just didn't get it done when he was supposed to, because he didn't do what he said he was going to do.
Imagine that.
Imagine that. And then my email crashed and my website crashed, like all in the week that we moved over here. So
He's in the front.
so I literally have been dead in the water for a week now, and this is the worst possible time. There are some people that, there's a lot of word of mouth of what we're doing, and there are people that are poking their head in, and I'm always okay with that, except for the kids. The kids need to be in by appointment, because we can't handle 15 new kids in at one time.
Yep.
The email is working now. We are in the process of, again, I should have had a new website, should have been online a couple of weeks ago. It should be up any day now, hopefully. And all of that will be streamlined and we'll be running again, and that'll be a very easy way to get a hold of us. As far as adults go, I don't really care. Mondays and Wednesdays are our fundamentals, and anybody can come in pretty much any of those days.
What times are your fundamentals on Mondays and Wednesdays?
11 a.m. to 12 and 6:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m.
Okay.
And that's where everybody starts. And I don't care if you got a white belt on or a black belt. That's where everybody starts, because it's a filter program.
Sure.
I want to make sure that everybody coming in the door wants to do what we're doing. And like I said, we keep it very easy. We keep it very light. exposure to what we do. If you want to dive deeper into it beyond that, there's opportunity to. If you don't, then don't. There's a lot of people that come in and they just go to those classes. I've got black belts that'll just go to those classes. And so it's fine. It works out okay. There's the only hesitation is just walking in the door the first time, and I equate it to anything else that you've done that you've never done before. As soon as you get started doing it, it's not as bad as the demon in your head that you made. And we are exactly the same thing. The interesting thing about what we do is our student retention and sign-up rate is through the roof, beyond anybody I've ever come across anywhere in the world, that people sign up and they stay because the environment that we create is so different than anywhere else. And I don't get it, because to me that's just how it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
But not everybody else feels the way that I do, and so it's just something that we do. And like I said, it's just created this really cool environment where everybody's really neat. And I think one of the things that I've really pushed, which is something I do bring, is we have a very strong public service group, and so. CMPD, Cabarrus Sheriff's Department, I've been heavy in those departments since I've been here. Fire Department, teachers, any kind of EMT, anything along those lines, we give discounts for those. Yeah. So I like to bring those people around me because I support what they do too. Military, anybody ex-military, I give military discounts for as well. And those are things that to me are just super easy, because we're all, moral compass is all pointed the same direction, and that's the most important thing. We're all different, we all have different opinions, but as long as the moral compass is pointed the same way, then we typically get along very well. And so that's the hardest part, really, is just make the first step. Same thing as coming in here. Just walk in the door. If you walk in the door, you'll see that it's great. And that's it. And so it's been something that I've done very, very I've been lucky that I've done it very well, that I've never advertised before.
That's great.
We've always done word of mouth, and it's always been people that have been coming looking for me that have done what we've done. And so it's just...
I have this funny feeling that things are about to get very, very busy for you in a good way, because I can think of 10 people just off the top of my head that have said, hey, you let me know when he's open and we're going to do it. And they're all guys that, like you said, I mean, again, we've got a great culture here, like you do.
Right.
So they're all guys you look at and you're like, man, that would be really fun to spend an hour doing something completely different that we know nothing about. And for me, it's selfishly, it'll be great to be the beginner in the room again. You know?
And I think that's one of the coolest things about it, is that when you're in there and you're doing that, you have to focus on it. It's a safety issue. But it's also that you want to, and so it's a step away from the rest of the world for an hour. And so you must walk away from your business. You must walk away from your phone. You have to walk away from your family for an hour, and it gives you that time to reset. And it's not tedious, it's not monotonous, it's not repetitive, and not that I don't love that part too, because it can be, if you want to get good at it, you have to repeat. It is technique based, and so but the action of being in there is a reset. That's all it is. So it gives you a chance to reset and then take on all of life's struggles with a different perspective, which is, to me, I think that's the coolest thing about it. I think that's the best part beyond just the people. And so it's a stress reliever. It's a way to get those endorphins going. It's a way to get the sweat, get the workout going without the actual workout. I love being on the weights, but to me, this is... you get that without having to work for it.
For sure.
And so there's a benefit to all of it. And some people, absolutely, that's all they want to do is go and push the iron, because the iron doesn't fight back. But it does. And it doesn't ever quit. But this is, there's a tangible growth that's not just visual. It's not just, you can't just see like your growth based off of how you feel and your body type. It's more about how you perceive the world. That's what we change. It's the way that you look at things. We look at things different to just move through the world differently, and Jiu Jitsu is very, very interesting that way. And to me, I'm a student of human nature, and I love to pull things apart and put them back together and see how they work. And like I said, the rabbit hole on this is very, very, very deep. I've been doing this for 23 years, and I still love it.
I think what we'll do, we'll post, we'll link the website for this.
Yep.
We'll put as much information as I can so that people know they can. I would imagine just contact you directly, and then
that's the easiest way. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like I said, Mondays and Wednesdays, our day classes are pretty laid back because it's people that can be here during the day.
Yep.
The night classes are busy. They're structured. It's get in, get out, and so it's definitely. We don't want an influx of people coming in, but it's okay to just pop your head in and come on in.
Well, I'm excited, man. I appreciate you coming on here. I think this is going to be a great start to a relationship that I think Vitality and Fight to Win are about to be, correlated for a long time.
Yeah,
and,
I'm super excited about it. I think it's great for both of us for sure. I'm just as excited, and probably more so than you are.
I don't know. I really don't know. I've been talking about this for 4 months now.
He's been talking about it nonstop. He can't wait to partner with me. I'm like, I don't want to partner with you.
We will do a video log at some point where, I think what would be really cool is a follow-up to this would be like a day in the life kind of thing. Like what does it look like to go to a class? And I think that would really get people to understand that there's not this fear associated with it. I'm not going in and wrestling Steve.
Yeah.
That would be,
No,
That's good.
but I'm not.
Later.
Yeah, later.
Later.
I can have a GoPro on you, and as I'm choking you, as you're going to sleep, the GoPro fades to black.
There's lots of videos on YouTube that you can go check. And
Phil's got a sense of humor and an imagination.
It wouldn't happen.
Guys, this is Steve Hall. I'm Steve Pinkerton and Philip Lewis.
Yep.
Till
Thank
next
you.
time, this is Built by Vitality Podcast.